3:47 a.m. Interstate 17, 40 miles south of Flagstaff, Arizona. A federal transport van pulls onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. Inside, 2 U.S. Marshals and 1 prisoner strapped to a 5-point restraint harness. The prisoner is convulsing, foam at the mouth, eyes rolled back. The lead marshal radios dispatch. Medical emergency. Prisoner code 7. Request ambulance to mile marker 289. 11 minutes later, the ambulance arrives. 2 paramedics step out. Professional. Calm. They work the prisoner onto a gurney. 1 marshal rides in the back, the other follows in the van. At 4:03 a.m., the ambulance takes an unscheduled exit onto a service road. The marshal in the back reaches for his sidearm. He never clears the holster. By 4:09 a.m., 2 marshals are zip-tied inside the ambulance, which has been abandoned behind a shuttered gas station. The prisoner is gone. So are the paramedics. So is the ambulance's radio. The fugitive's name on the transport manifest read Miguel Arroyo-Vences. 7 federal murder warrants, a $2.4 million bounty, linked to contract killings across 4 states. For 73 days, the United States Marshals Service would not acknowledge he had escaped. This is the manhunt they refused to publicize. Until now. Phoenix, November 14th, 2025. The U.S. Marshals Service Southwest Regional Fugitive Task Force occupied the 14th floor of the Sandra Day O'Connor Federal Courthouse. By 9 a.m. that morning, only 4 people in the building knew what had happened on Interstate 17 6 hours earlier. Deputy United States Marshal Eleanor Vasquez was one of them, 17 years in the service. She ran the Technical Operations Group out of Phoenix. Her unit handled the fugitives nobody talked about. At 9:14 a.m., she received a sealed file from the U.S. Attorney's Office. The file had been closed to all but 4 names. Hers was one. Inside, photographs, fingerprint cards, a psychological profile, and a list of 7 homicides spanning 2021 through 2024. 4 in Arizona, 2 in New Mexico, 1 in West Texas, all unsolved until August 2025, when a witness in protective custody identified the shooter. Miguel Arroyo-Vences, born 1987 in Culiacan, former enforcer for the Sinaloa cartel's Beltran Leyva faction. Known in cartel intelligence files as El Médico, because he had once trained as a trauma nurse before moving into contract work. That detail would matter later. Vasquez underlined it twice. By 10 a.m., she had assembled the core team: 4 deputies, 1 intelligence analyst, 1 liaison from the FBI's El Paso field office. They would work from a secure room on the 14th floor. No phones, no outside communication. Everything on a closed network. Their first briefing lasted 40 minutes. It ended with one question from the analyst. How does a cartel enforcer know the exact GPS coordinates where a federal prisoner transport will pull over for a medical emergency that hasn't happened yet? Nobody in the room had an answer. The escape had been planned for at least 6 weeks. That was the first conclusion. Because Arroyo-Vences had been in federal custody since August 27, 2025, held at the Central Arizona Florence Correctional Complex, pending transfer to the U.S. District Court in Phoenix for arraignment. The transport on November 14th was his third. The first 2 had followed different routes. Someone had mapped the rotation. Someone had known which route was scheduled for that morning. Someone had positioned a stolen ambulance, later recovered from a rural/metro fleet yard in Apache Junction, within 11 minutes of mile marker 289. Vasquez pulled the personnel files of every U.S. Marshal, contractor, and federal employee who had accessed the transport schedule in the preceding 60 days. The list ran 43 names. By November 17th, she had narrowed it to 11. By November 21st, she had narrowed it to 3. None of them cracked under interview. None of them showed financial irregularities. None of them had known connections to the Sinaloa network. The leak, if there was one, had not yet surfaced. Meanwhile, Arroyo-Vences had vanished. Not one confirmed sighting in 72 hours. No hits on license plate readers. No cellular signals tied to known cartel numbers. No wire transfers to known cartel accounts. He had disappeared into the desert like he had been trained for it. Because he had been. Spent hours going through the case file, and one detail kept nagging me. In 2019, Arroyo-Vences had completed an 18-month EMT basic certification program at a community college in Hermosillo. He had scored in the 98th percentile on the practical exam. His instructor, interviewed by DEA in 2023, remembered him as quiet, disciplined, unusually calm during simulated mass casualty drills. He had wanted to be a paramedic before he became a killer. That detail is what the whole manhunt would eventually turn on. November 28, 2025. Thanksgiving. Vasquez was in the task force room at 7 a.m. The other 4 deputies were there too. Nobody had taken the day off. The intelligence analyst, a former DEA data scientist named Priya Reddy, had been running a pattern search against EMT, paramedic, and emergency medical services hiring databases across 12 western states. Her hypothesis: a man with his skill set would not waste it. He would hide inside it. She had 2,847 new hire records for EMS positions, filled between November 14th and November 28th. Filtered by age, height, weight, and ethnicity parameters, loosely matching Arroyo-Vences, she had 631 candidates. Filtered again by hires who presented out-of-state identification and Spanish-English bilingual certification, she had 84. 84 potential shadows across 6 states. Nobody said it, but everyone understood. If they pulled personnel records on all 84, and if even one of those hires was connected to the network that had extracted him, the target would be gone within hours. They had to narrow it further, without a warrant, without alerting anyone. The obstacle arrived on December 3rd. A winter storm moved across the Four Corners region, dumping 11 inches of snow in 20 hours and knocking out power to 3 of the 6 states Reddy was searching. Hiring database synchronization paused. 2 of the task force's confidential informants in Sonora went dark. A planned interview with a former cellmate of Arroyo-Vences in El Paso was canceled because the witness couldn't be reached. 72 hours lost. Vasquez used those 72 hours to do something unusual. She pulled every children's hospital and pediatric emergency volunteer roster in the 6-state search zone. Her reasoning, recorded in a case note dated December 4th, 2025, a man with a medical conscience hiding from what he had done would volunteer near children. Psychologists on the task force had flagged the pattern. Contract killers with medical training who decompensate under long-term stress often seek proximity to patients they perceive as innocent. It was a thin theory. It was what they had. By December 6th, the storm lifted. Reddy cross-referenced her 84 EMS hires against volunteer rosters at pediatric facilities. The list collapsed to 9. 9 paramedics, 6 states, each one a potential match. The task force could not approach them directly. A single premature contact would blow the entire search. Instead, Vasquez requested the FBI's Technical Operations Center run a covert biometric comparison against each candidate's employer-submitted fingerprint card. Every paramedic in the United States submits prints for state EMS certification. Those prints sit in state regulatory databases. The comparison took 11 days because the FBI had to pull each state's records individually under separate legal authorities without flagging the query to local administrators. On December 17, 2025 at 2:41 p.m., the comparison returned a single match. Reno, Nevada. REMSA Health. Paramedic ID badge number 4471. Name on file, Raymond Michael Holt. Date of hire, November 19, 2025. 5 days after the escape. Fingerprint match confidence, 99.4%. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. Holt had sailed through REMSA's background check. Clean driver's license issued in Oregon in August 2025. Clean credit history. Spotless EMT paramedic certification, transferred from a legitimate Oregon EMS agency that confirmed his employment from January 2023 through October 2025. 3 character references, all of whom answered the phone when called. All of whom described a quiet, competent, punctual coworker. Every piece of it was fabricated, and every piece of it was perfect. That is not the work of one man on the run. That is a network with access to state-level EMS records, credit bureaus, and at least 3 cooperating individuals willing to stand on a phone call and lie to a hospital HR department. Vasquez now had 2 targets: the fugitive, and whoever had built him a life. If you're watching this, pause for a second and put yourself in Vasquez's shoes on the afternoon of December 17th. You have located a man wanted for 7 murders. He is working 12-hour shifts driving an ambulance through the streets of Reno. He is responding to medical calls. He has a defibrillator, a trauma kit, and access to narcotics inside a moving vehicle. He is a trained combatant. And you cannot simply walk up and arrest him, because if you move too fast, he disappears again. And the network that built him collapses its evidence before you can touch it. You have 40 deputies ready to deploy. You have one chance to do this right. Before we go into how they close the trap, a quick note. If you appreciate the detail in these reconstructions, tap the like button now. It genuinely helps the channel surface real casework instead of clickbait. We're just getting to the hard part. December 18th, 2025. Vasquez deployed a 6-person surveillance team to Reno under commercial cover. They operated from a rented house in Sparks, Nevada, 4 miles from REMSA's main dispatch facility. No direct visual on the target for the first 72 hours. Holt's shifts were irregular. Ambulance routes covered most of Washoe County. On December 21st, the team obtained its first confirmed visual. Holt, wearing a REMSA uniform, responded to a cardiac arrest call at a residence in northwest Reno. He worked the patient for 19 minutes. The patient survived. The surveillance log for that call noted one detail. Holt had asked the patient's wife, in Spanish, whether she wanted a priest. The wife later told a REMSA chaplain that the paramedic's Spanish had been from somewhere down south, not Mexico City, farther. Culiacan, Spanish. The analyst on the task force confirmed it. 3 weeks of surveillance followed. Holt's pattern of life solidified. He rented a 1-bedroom apartment on Mill Street. He drove a 2019 Toyota Corolla registered under his alias. He shopped at a Safeway on Cutscoo Lane every Tuesday evening. He ate breakfast at a 24-hour diner called Peg's Glorified Ham and Eggs on South Virginia Street, most mornings after his overnight shifts ended at 7 a.m. He also volunteered every Saturday afternoon from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. at Renown Children's Hospital. He read to pediatric oncology patients. Spanish-language storybooks. One of the surveillance deputies wrote in her log on December 27, 2025, "Target interaction with pediatric patients observed at length. Target reads aloud for extended periods. Patients responsive and engaged. Operational note, this man has killed 7 people." That is the sentence that sits with you when you read the case file. Those 2 things, inside the same person, on the same day. Consider what that tells you about the case. A cartel hitman was smuggled across a federal dragnet, issued a state EMS license under a fabricated identity, hired by a legitimate ambulance service, and placed on the street within 31 days. Not because any single background check was broken, because the system runs on trust. State regulators trust database inputs, employers trust state regulators, patients trust employers. And a network with enough resources only has to corrupt one layer to get a man through all of them. What happened in Reno in late 2025 was not one background check failing. It was a demonstration of how fast that kind of operation can move. Back to the operation. The task force faced a second obstacle on January 6, 2026. Their prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Phoenix, a career AUSA named David Okafor, flagged a problem with the planned takedown location. Arresting Holt at his apartment, or during a volunteer shift at the Children's Hospital or at REMSA dispatch, all carried unacceptable risk of hostage scenarios, civilian casualties, or tipping the network before the second phase of the investigation could execute. The arrest had to happen somewhere predictable, somewhere public enough to provide eyewitness cover, somewhere private enough to control the scene, somewhere he would not be armed. Peg's glorified ham and eggs, South Virginia Street, post shift, every second or third morning at approximately 7:20 a.m. Holt entered alone, sat in the same booth, third from the rear, facing the door, ordered the same breakfast, paid in cash, and left within 40 minutes. The booth choice told Vasquez something. Even after 53 days of embedded cover, he still sat where he could see every person who walked through the front door. 23 years in the cartel economy leaves that kind of mark. A paramedic uniform does not undo it. That is why the arrest team would have to come through the back. The raid was approved on January 20th, 2026. Joint Operation. U.S. Marshals Service Special Operations Group. Nevada State Police SWAT. Reno Police Department Tactical Liaison. A Nevada Highway Patrol Aviation Unit placed on standby. Total personnel, 47. Of those, 9 would be inside or immediately adjacent to the diner at the moment of contact. The rest formed a 3-ring perimeter out to a half-mile radius. The operational plan ran 41 pages, 7 contingencies, 3 abort triggers, 1 rule of engagement, no shots fired unless the target produced a weapon. Arroyo-Vences was wanted alive. The network he was attached to could only be unwound through his cooperation. The raid was scheduled for January 26, 2026. The day Holt's shift rotation indicated he would end an overnight call cycle and, per pattern, walk into Peg's by 7:18 a.m. January 25, 2026. 43 minutes before the final pre-op briefing, a secure line into the task force rang. It was REMSA's Director of Operations. Holt had just called out sick for his upcoming shift. First missed shift in 10 weeks. The room froze. 3 possibilities. He was genuinely ill. He had been tipped. He was preparing to move. Vasquez gave her team 11 minutes to decide. She pulled the surveillance log. The Mill Street apartment showed lights on at 22:47 the previous night and had gone dark at 23:14. Normal pattern. The Corolla had not moved from its parking slot. She made the call. The raid would proceed at 7:20 a.m. on January 26th, regardless of the shift cancellation. If he failed to appear at the diner, secondary teams would hit the apartment, REMSA dispatch, and Peg's simultaneously at 7:25. She did not sleep that night. Neither did anyone on the team. January 26th, 2026, 5:30 a.m. The perimeter went active. Aviation unit spinning rotors at Reno Tahoe International, 3 minutes flight time from the objective. 2 entry teams staged in a laundry facility behind the diner. 1 sniper observer on the roof of a Walgreens across South Virginia Street. A female deputy U.S. Marshal dressed as a rideshare driver parked a black sedan on the east side of the diner's lot with a direct sight line to the booth Holt preferred. 6:41 a.m. The Corolla pulled out of the Mill Street parking lot. It turned south, towards South Virginia Street. 6:58 a.m. The Corolla parked in the Peg's lot. Raymond Holt stepped out. He wore his REMSA uniform jacket, left arm slightly stiff, an old injury, no visible weapon. 7:02 a.m. He entered through the front door, sat in the third booth from the rear. Ordered, a waitress brought coffee. 7:14 a.m. Vasquez gave the signal. The entry was not through the back. That had been a feint in the operational plan, deliberately recorded on the encrypted net in case the network had compromised communications. The actual entry came through the front door. 4 deputies in plainclothes already seated at the counter, already drinking coffee, already positioned within 6 feet of the target's booth. The lead deputy stood up, badge in left hand, right hand on a concealed sidearm but not drawn. He said one sentence. Miguel Arroyo-Vences, United States Marshals Service. Keep your hands on the table. Arroyo-Vences looked up. The surveillance log of that morning records what happened next in a single line. Target complied. 11 seconds from verbal notification to restraint. He did not resist. He did not speak. He placed his hands flat on the table, palms down, fingers spread. He waited for the cuffs. The waitress had not yet brought his food. He was moved to a secure federal holding facility in Carson City by 9:30 a.m. Within 6 hours, 3 additional arrests were executed. A REMSA HR administrator in Reno, who had approved Holt's employment file without requesting original documentation. A former Oregon EMS coordinator in Bend, who had signed off on the fraudulent transfer paperwork. A man in Tijuana, apprehended at the San Ysidro port of entry the following afternoon, carrying cash and a Mexican passport in a false name. He is currently designated in court documents as the network's U.S.-side logistics handler. 3 names, 3 pieces of the architecture that had walked a killer through every layer of American emergency medical infrastructure in 5 days. Prosecutors believe there are at least 4 more who have not yet been identified. Here's the controversial position. The individuals who forged those credentials and placed that man behind the wheel of an ambulance are not incidental to this case. They should be charged under federal terrorism enhancement statutes. Not because Arroyo-Vences is a terrorist in the political sense, but because the network deliberately embedded a contract killer into a first responder role. Every patient he treated during those 10 weeks was treated by a man whose job, elsewhere, had been to manufacture the injuries paramedics exist to reverse. That is not document fraud. That is an attack on the medical system itself. The current charges, wire fraud, identity document fraud, harboring a fugitive, do not capture what actually happened. We'll say it plainly. That is the take. What do you think? Does that framing go too far or not far enough? Drop your answer in the comments. The investigators who worked this case are divided on the same question. One detail that stuck with me. In the booth where Arroyo-Vences was arrested, evidence technicians recovered a children's book tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket. Spanish language. Worn. Annotated in pencil in the margins, in his handwriting, with phonetic pronunciation marks in English. He had been practicing for the children at the hospital. The book was logged into evidence as item 47B. It is not going to be returned. The children at Renown Children's Hospital were told the next Saturday that Raymond could not come anymore. They were not told why. The hospital quietly notified parents of pediatric oncology patients. 3 families have since declined to comment publicly. The hospital has implemented enhanced volunteer background screening. REMSA terminated Holt's employment on January 26, 2026, at 10:47 a.m. A spokesperson issued a statement confirming that the individual employed under the name Raymond Holt had never been involved in any allegation of patient harm during his period of service with the agency. That statement was accurate. In the 10 weeks Arroyo-Vences worked for REMSA, he responded to 387 emergency calls. The patient survival rate on his calls was 91.3%. The agency average was 89.7%. He was, by every measurable performance standard, slightly better than his peers. Arroyo-Vences was arraigned in U.S. District Court in Phoenix on February 3, 2026. He entered no plea. His court-appointed federal public defender filed a motion for competency evaluation. That evaluation is ongoing. Trial has been scheduled for September 2026, though both parties have signaled that a cooperation agreement is under discussion. If he cooperates, prosecutors expect indictments against at least 11 additional individuals across Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, and Baja California. If he does not, the case proceeds on the 7 original murder counts, each of which carries a mandatory life sentence. The identity of the individual inside the federal system who provided the transport schedule for November 14th has not been established. The internal investigation is sealed. 3 U.S. Marshals Service employees were placed on administrative leave in February 2026. As of the current date, none have been charged. There was one piece of this the task force chose not to include in the public case summary. On January 26th, during the post-arrest inventory of Holt's Mill Street apartment, deputies found a second identity packet hidden behind a heating vent. A Canadian passport, a British Columbia driver's license. $10,000 in Canadian currency. A bus ticket dated February 2nd, 2026, for a crossing at Blaine, Washington. He had been 7 days from disappearing a second time. The Canadian identity was of high enough quality that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police opened a parallel investigation in Vancouver. That investigation is, at this time, unresolved. The forger has not been identified. At least 3 other identity packets of comparable quality are believed to be in circulation for other unknown subjects. The network Arroyo-Vences used to disappear did not collapse with his arrest. It continued operating. It may still be operating now. The manhunt is closed. The fugitive is in federal custody. 7 murder victims have, on paper, received the investigative resources the system owes them. The 4 U.S. Marshals who worked this case from the 14th floor of a Phoenix courthouse did what the system hired them to do. No shots were fired. No civilians were harmed. A paramedic uniform is back in a REMSA locker. The architecture that produced Raymond Holt is still producing Raymond Holtz. Somewhere, right now, in a state regulatory database, there is a hiring record that will look real until the moment it does not.